All right, welcome to Preserving Eastern State Now panel. This is part of a weekend-long celebration commemorating 30 years of tours at Eastern State. We began giving tours in 1994, and the site looked wildly different then than it does today. Visitors had to wear a hard hat to come on site and sign a waiver, and a lot of the site was inaccessible. Yesterday's panel was about the saving of Eastern State and the early years of tours here. And today is going to be about the preservation work that's being done today by this team next to me. The work that they do is invaluable to the site. I can't even begin to emphasize how important the work is that they do. From routine work, tap testing, yearly inspections, to swooping in when Eastern State throws us a few curveballs, to larger scale projects like the work being done in Cell Block 14 now, and the work that was done in the Sioux Valley behind us, which is the dining halls, and then also training new members of the field with our Preservation Trade Center. The work that this group does is constant, really important, and it's all around you. You might walk past something and not see it, but it's something that they've looked at. There's also the bigger, flashier projects, but everything that they do is really important. My name is Samantha Hone. I'm a Visitor Services Lead here at Eastern State. I've been here for about 7 years, and I consider it one of the greatest perks to being able to see this work being done in real time. I always get really excited when Liz comes and tells us about some new project that they're doing. We get to see it before any of the work is done. Sometimes you get to sneak a peek while it's happening, and then you get to see it afterwards, and it is really like a wonderful thing that I get to experience. I've been here long enough to see spaces transformed, and also to learn new truths about Eastern State that we have some truths that we thought were fact be debunked by the work done here. So it is really an absolute pleasure to be able to talk with Liz, Jess, and Sarah. So without further ado, let's get started. Would you be able to just introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about what you do at Eastern State, how long you've been here, and maybe how you got into the field.
Hi everyone, my name is Liz Trumbull. I'm the Director of Preservation Facilities and Trade Programs here at Eastern State. I've been at Eastern State full-time since 2018, but actually started as an intern in 2017 while I was getting my graduate degree in historic preservation. I started working at Eastern State trying to think about how we can do workforce development, how we can train people in the trades. And then when I came on the team full-time in 2018, I started working on taking care of the building, all of the big projects, the small projects, every contractor that comes through the door. I speak with them, make sure that we're on the same page about what their work is, how we take care of the building. And I have the pleasure of working with Jess and Sarah on a very regular basis to make sure that we are doing right by the building and engaging in all the best practices when it comes to historic preservation.
Hi everyone, my name is Sara Gdula. I am an architectural conservator with Heritage Conservation Collective. So we are all over the Philadelphia and surrounding regions, all over with a bunch of historic sites, particularly Eastern State Penitentiary. I have also been here since about 2018. I also have a background in historic preservation. And yeah, getting to work with all of you guys on big projects, regular maintenance, everything from emergency to the normal.
Hi everybody, I'm Jessica Senker. I'm a preservation architect. I'm a principal of J&M Preservation Studio. Myself and my business partner, Melanie Rodbart, have been working at this site for more than 20 years. So we feel really lucky to be working here. Mel is a structural engineer, and like I said, I'm an architect. And I feel really lucky to not only work with Mel, but also this great team next to me. It's amazing what we've been able to accomplish over this, last 2 decades, but even more recently, what Liz and Sarah has been able to bring to this site has been great.
Great, thank you. And just so that we can get the audience maybe familiarized with the type of work that you do here, would you be able to elaborate on a recent project that the three of you worked on together? And then what role do each of you play in the planning and implementation of each project on site?
I'll start just really quickly. So the project that is just about finished is Cell Block 14. And I was the architect for that, and it's a combination of a roofing project, skylight restoration, facade restoration project, and then also installation of life safety devices so we can open it to the public. And working with Liz and Sara, they were instrumental in not only planning this project, but that also working through all the kinks of figuring out what is the best materials to use for the facade, also reviewing the materials we're going to use for the roof and the skylight restoration, making sure that we're using preservation best practices and it's in keeping with what we do here. And I'll let Sara talk a little bit about the materials testing.
Okay, so as a conservator, we do a lot of the hands-on testing of materials. So we were doing a small mock-up to see how this would transpire into a larger project. So we chose a piece of the wall that we were able to, where some of the rebar had been installed a little bit too close to the surface, and so when it rested, it kind of popped the surface of the concrete off. So you get these long lines of rebar that's exposed, which is not good for the building. So we chose a small area to do a mock-up where we grind out some of the existing concrete to make a good stable surface. We treated the rebar, and when the rebar was too far gone, we were able to trim that away and put replacement rebar in, and then we were choosing the materials with which to put on top of that. So we want to think about longevity of the materials. Obviously, you can put just straight up concrete back on top of it, but with changes in preservation technology, there are new materials that use some latex additives that help with the bond of the old masonry with the new masonry. So we were able to do some custom color matching to the concrete of that surface and use those different custom colors to try and then fill in that void that we had made and make the surface look as kind of as uniform as possible. That way the rebar is no longer exposed and it protects it for a longer period of time.
And I guess from the kind of client or owner perspective for this project, a lot of it comes down to money and fundraising, right? So we have an 11-acre site that we are constantly taking care of. The site has come such a long way in the last 30 years. In the 80s, the site was completely overgrown with trees, roofs were collapsing, things like that. So we've come a long way, but there still are a lot of projects left to do. So in preparing for this Cell Block 14 project, it was all about when is this project becoming a priority and how do we make sure that we have the funds in place to do that. So I was involved with some historic research about the building so that we could write a story or a narrative about why it's important and why it's worth saving. And we were able to secure a grant from the Save America's Treasures, the National Park Service, as well as a RACP grant to fund the project with the support of an anonymous donor as well. And so we were able to kind of get the funding to engage Jess to do all the design drawings and her partner Mel, and then bid out the project to the roofers and masons to actually get everyone here. We're also involved in making sure that the project fits with our preservation philosophy and scope. So that's obviously a thing that Jess and Sara have a huge part in. But like Sara prepared the mock-up, but then Jess and I review to say, okay, this is what we're looking for, or no, we think we should change X, Y, and Z. So that's kind of what Eastern State's role was in that project.
Okay, thank you. And Sara, you brought up that new technology has allowed you to kind of do that color matching. Is there other examples that you can bring up of how changes in preservation technology have affected the work that you've done on site in that aspect, but also has that helped you kind of understand new truths about the site?
So like I said, you can a bunch of different materials that we're choosing from for this particular project. So the material that we chose is a newer material. It's a concrete repair material that utilizes a latex additive that helps keep everything together, honestly. Whenever you have two surfaces, old and new, it's a lot harder to get them to stick together than it is, to have just a full concrete wall that's poured at the same time. So as far as that, we're always going to be doing old school things, like just sticking mortar in walls to make sure things don't fall down. But we also have a lot of other newer technologies as far as mapping and as far as planning as well. So I know that Liz was working with some things with the perimeter wall survey that happens.
Yeah, there are actually two things I was thinking of when you were asking that question and listening to your response. The first was something that just happened on Friday when Jess and I were doing the punch list for cell block 14. We went into an alley between cell blocks 11 and 14. It's not open to the public, it's not open to our staff. We needed to get in there to inspect the building. And we realized that there were some stones that had fallen out of the wall of cell block 11. So Sam mentioned earlier curveballs that Eastern State throws at us. That was one of them. We were like, when did this happen? That wall had previously been stitched together with these like through bolts and plates. When was that, Jess? Like 2012? Okay, so over a decade ago. But we were out there looking at it and we were like, well, in similar situations elsewhere on site, we would have used a different type of anchor if that same instance had happened in the last 5 years. So just an example of how technology changes and how our approach to a repair might change as a result. And then the project that Sara mentioned is our perimeter wall. Obviously a huge resource, a 30-foot tall, half-mile long wall that's exposed on both sides. It's a big thing to take care of. And we don't, up until recently, we didn't understand very much about its condition. And so we were looking at ways to better understand its construction and any issues that it might have kind of at scale without destroying or damaging the wall. So we were able to use some surface penetrating radar in order to gauge the depth of each of the stones to better understand how well the wall is tied together. And then we were also able to use that radar to understand the voiding in the wall, any places where the mortar had fallen out and now these stones were just kind of dry packed together. We were able to get a sense of that volume of voiding through the use of that technology, which was much lower than we thought, which was awesome, because that influences kind of the timeline that we're working off of when we are planning and budgeting for the repairs and what we need to take care of that wall in the future. And that was a project that Jess was integral in terms of kind of the whole thing, but especially the budgeting portion of it and the design portion of what does it look like to repair it and how much is that going to cost. But I'll hand it to you if you want to talk about that or anything else.
I'll just piggyback on what you were saying. So yeah, we were very much interested in looking at this, large-scale wall and how are we going to better take care of it. So the other testing that Liz did talk about too was the thermography, which is basically looking at the moisture retention in the wall and what does that pattern look like on top of the voiding pattern that we saw too. And it was really interesting because we had always thought that the moisture retention was further up towards the top of the wall because we have issues along the coping up there. But that's not really true. We found that there was moisture retention a little bit at the top, but there's also moisture retention in the middle and at the bottom of the wall, which told us something that we hadn't expected, which was that depending on which way the wall was facing and how well the mortar was integrated into the wall and the stone depth and all of those things combined together, the moisture was traveling in different ways throughout the wall, which we hadn't expected. And then, like Liz was saying, learning about the depth of the stone, and we eventually made some probes into the wall to kind of see, we wanted to verify what we thought we were seeing with the X-ray. And it was eye-opening because we had always thought, or at least I always thought, but I think a lot of us always thought that there were dressed stones on the outside and, kind of partially dressed stones on the inside, and at the core of this wall, because it's 8 feet wide at the base, we always thought that the core of the wall was just junk, like just rubble, like small stones and sand and mortar, and that's not what we found. We found some really, really big stones. So it made us feel better that the wall is constructed well. It is going to last, another 200, 300, 400, 500 years. But it was fascinating to see that kind of all come into play. And if you're curious, the wall restoration project is millions of dollars.
So just kind of bringing it back to the fact that, you know, we've been open doing tours for 30 years and this preservation work has been going on for quite some time. What can you do now because of that work that was done by Sally, by, you know, everybody in the last 30 years, even the last 5 years? What projects can you take on now that you would not have been able to beforehand?
I mean, honestly, any specialty project, just having the roof above your head is really nice, and knowledge that the walls are not going to fall down on top of you, that's pretty important. So at that point, then you are able to take on specialty projects like the restoration of Al Capone's cell, or artist cells that you see throughout the site, definitely.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, we're not in as deep of a stage of triage as we were 30 years ago. So we have the luxury of documentation and research, and we have all of these reports that we can rely on too. There was so much work done in the 90s just to better understand the site and its history and its construction. Like today we can lean on HSRs, we can lean on landscape studies, we can lean on all of these past reports to influence what we're doing. We have so many cost estimates, right? So we have a lot more resources at our disposal, and I was about to say a lot less urgent work, but.
So is there anything, you know, you guys have been here for quite some time, is there anything that you have done on the site that you fixed up that in retrospect you wish you had done differently?
Yeah, I will always be annoyed with myself for the skylights in sub block 7. So we thought we were doing the right thing. We thought we were doing exactly what we should be doing. And we went up and we field measured one of the skylights frames that was still up there. We basically had 3 skylights, or 2 skylights and 1 restored, recreated to match the other ones that we found up there. And we thought, okay, this is exactly what was here, and we're going to put it back. And good job for us. But they leak because there's a design flaw. We didn't catch it, and we should have caught it then. But we were trying to remain faithful to what we saw that was on site, because that's what we always try and do. And that's not always the best answer. So being more critical of what we see on the site is now definitely become part of our practice. It's not just okay, let's preserve it exactly as we see it, because there are things that could be done better. And now, like what Sara was saying, with new technology, new materials, things can be done better and can be preserved longer.
This is like an adjacent answer to that question, but I think like whenever we take on projects, we try our best to do the permanent repair and do the thing that's going to be the thing for the next 100, 200 years. Maybe we'll have to maintain it at some point, but we try to do the thing that's going to last. And whenever we're like touching something again that we did, I'm just like, oh, why are we doing this? And there's reasons for all of the ways that the site has evolved over time, but I think like recently we've been looking at cell block 1 a lot, trying to design a repair for the end of the building, and like cursing that like it has this overframe on it, right? Which was a very logical thing to do at the time it was constructed, but now we're like thinking about it again, being like, what would we do now? What will we do in the future? And so it's just like a project that was done in the lifetime of the museum and the nonprofit that maybe we'll think differently about over the next 10 years,
I guess related to that, do you find that you sometimes have to, you were just like what you were saying, do you find that you do have to go back and kind of go back and fix some of the fixes that you've done that have been done in the past? Do you find that you are doing that frequently, or do you find that or do you find that most of what you're doing is a newer scale project, or do you find yourself going back and fixing some of what had been considered to be the correct way to repair something?
do it right. So it's considered a temporary stabilization. So we've had to go back and do the permanent repairs. But I gotta say, doing the permanent repairs feels really good, because then it's like, okay, now we can hopefully walk away for another 50 years and not have to look at it again. A lot of it comes down to money.
It's making me think about the annual inspection that we do every year. Yeah, because every January, it's always the coldest time of year that we do this for whatever reason. But Jess and Mel and I and some of our colleagues walk the whole site, and we look for anything that could fall down, could crumble, could be a hazard to our staff or visitors. And Sara is often the one that goes back and fixes everything. But as we're doing this annual inspection, we're coming up with new tasks, and we're also coming up with monitoring items or things that we have to look at every year to make sure that the condition isn't changing. And when that monitoring list gets long, we're like pulling our hair out during the annual inspection and just being like, how do we stop looking at this thing every year and just like fix it in a way that we know that it's good and know that it's fine. And so that comes down to the funding and doing the permanent repair. Things that are on the monitoring list they're not urgent, they're just conditions that we're tracking over time, so it's fine to leave them, but it gets overwhelming. We have so many things that we just have to look at every year and be like, okay, is it still the same? Like, it's not ideal, but it's fine. And it would be great to, fix them and get that list shorter every year.
Thank you. So I guess just kind of shifting a little bit, because you're looking at doing repairs that will have longevity, but something that is on the forefront of my mind is, what effect does a changing climate have on a building like Eastern State? And so what impact does warming temperatures, more extreme weather have on the building? And what is this team doing to mitigate that impact?
I can start. One of the things that we're expecting in this region is an increase in rainfall. And so I think about that from our water management perspective, right? So when it rains, we start at the roof, and then we think about where it goes from there. So talking about the roofs in Eastern State, we still have roofs that don't have proper roofs. We still have roofs that are covered in plastic. We still have roofs that don't have adequate drainage connections, right? So we need to be able to make sure that the water transfers from the roof into the sewer system. But then there's all of this, going back to new technology, there are all of these other ways to manage stormwater in a way that's more green, right? So when we did the first phase of our visitor center project out front, you guys might notice all the new concrete right in front of the site. There's a giant stormwater basin underground. So the water goes into the storm system, and then it sits there. It doesn't overwhelm the city sewer system. It sits underground for a while, and some of it percolates, and then some of it eventually goes into the system. So that's a much greener way of managing the stormwater. Doing projects like that in other parts of the site is a huge undertaking, but one that we are prepared for. So we completed a stormwater master plan to think about what are those green stormwater projects that we would take on in all these different parts of the site, what order might we consider doing them in, how much does that cost, and so over time we're prepared to implement more projects like that, so that we're more responsibly managing that stormwater over time. You want to talk about HVAC?
So, what we're also expecting is not only, greater rainfall, but of course, warmer temperatures. So, trying to wrestle with how do you provide more climate-controlled areas within a 11-acre site. It's mass masonry construction. It's got a ton of, single pane windows and skylights and lots of openings and gaps and things like that. And these long corridors. I mean, it's how do you install HVAC systems in places that look like that without you really seeing it. And it's something we've been talking about more recently because of because the summer's coming and it's getting hotter and hotter each year. And I will say that when we've done HVAC systems in other spaces like Catholic Chaplain's office or the synagogue, small spaces. It's a challenge because, again, like you said, you don't want to see the equipment. You don't want to see modern equipment in an 1829 building. So like for the Catholic Chaplain's office, all the ductwork and everything is under the floor. And the floor itself is actually just wood framing with wood TNG flooring, and then it's like a small, tiny little areaway underneath there. It's just dirt. So we had to dig out some of the dirt, put a vapor barrier in, run all the ductwork underneath, and then there's trunk lines that go up along the wall and onto the roof and through the skylight, into the skylight. So when you're inside the Catholic Chaplain's office, which is another stored space, we didn't want to see any of that equipment. So it was an incredible amount of planning that went into that and design, and a lot of cursing from the contractor. Quite frankly, he did not like me at all.
Yeah, and a combination of both water and heat as a mass masonry building, the hotter the air gets, the more water it can contain, just even relative humidity, not just necessarily rainfall. So as we're getting these hotter temperatures and the higher relative humidities, the entire masonry structure does breathe. So water is moving through the walls, especially towards areas where it's getting hit by the sun. So as you see this moisture movement increasing, you're going to get more and more mortar falling out. It's going to be more and more. The maintenance is going to be required to keep everything stable in general. It's not just mortar, it's also finishes, paint, plaster, etc. So as we do get those higher temperatures, things are going to be moving more in general, and therefore going to have a tendency to want to become dislodged.
I just want to get one more in before we open it up to the audience, and this is just kind of like a pie in the sky. What is your absolute dream project you want to say? No time concerns, budget constraints, etc.
That's tough because there's a lot of fun stuff that I would love to do here. Although, like I said, we were saying before, a lot of the groundwork that was done 30 years ago that allows us to do this kind of thing, where we do have, just regular maintenance and stuff, it's that icing on the cake that we really kind of want to do sometimes that there's not enough money for. So as being such a large site, there are some really interesting architectural finishes. So not just necessarily an Alcapone cell, which you can see down that way, where we uncovered some of these interesting finishes, and we found out there might have been a mural here. And there are some other cells as I go through the site, sometimes in cells that the public can't go into. There's some interesting, really bright colors. There's some faux wood graining in some of the cells. So it'd be really interesting to do a whole site-wide architectural finishes survey to kind of look at that, and then that would be coupled with some archival research maybe to see like at what point in time might have been this bright red or bright blue rather than the institutional green that you see later. So that's really interesting. Unfortunately, there are other things that are more prominent and need our attention a little bit more.
We have multiple projects I want to do. So right above us, the second floor in the center, there used to be a library. And I would totally love to be able to bring that back online at some point. And not only that, but like open up the doorways up there so you can kind of see all the way around the prison. That's one of my projects that I'd love to see happen. And then the other two buildings are the second floor of the industrial building, which is not open to the public. Speaking of architectural finishes, it has these beautiful wood trusses with this ornamental painted finish on them. It's just amazing. It's this beautiful space. It used to be a theater. There's a stage there. It's wild. That, and then last but not least, the kitchen building. The kitchen building is another incredible building. It's offline. It's not open to the public because it's unsafe. But there's so many spaces in that kitchen building again with like these incredible truss systems in there and giant stoves, and just seeing how that building had functioned in history would be really wild to be able to bring back.
We're going to name every building on the site as part of answering this question. But I want to add two more to the mix. So the first is cell block 3 right over here. This is the hospital block. You can currently tour it as an Unlocking History tour. but so it has a roof, but there are parts of it that are not yet fully accessible, and parts that I would love to like. It's the hospital block, so it has all of these rooms that have had medical purposes over time, lots of cool equipment and things like that. So I'd love to like clean them out and make them more accessible. There's also just this bank of open area that doesn't have roofs, and so the cell block gets really wet, and just that would be so satisfying to get a roof on there. No more water. That's what I want. And then the administration building is the other building that I wanted to talk about. So if you walked through the gatehouse when you entered the site, we pretty much only occupy the like basement ground floor area of that building. We have some storage on the second floor, but that building is largely inaccessible. And it has like just long hallways and like many like mid-sized rooms with high ceilings that I would love to bring online for office space, for classroom space, for anything like that. It's also just like quite a challenge as far as buildings go. I don't know where we would put an elevator, but this is the pie in the sky discussion, so that's one that I would love to have more access to.
An elevator can go anywhere you want in a pie in the sky discussion. Does anybody in the audience have any questions for this group? And we're getting started back from the beginning now. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask?
It's okay if you missed part of the talk.
Yeah.
You're preservation, conservation, architect. If you have any questions about the building or how we take care of it, we're happy to chat some more.
So is the guard tower, the newer guard tower, on this as well, or is it trying to do something, or doesn't seem like it would be interesting as well to see
Are you talking about the guard tower that's like above us at the middle of the site?
well, I guess it's the guard tower above us, but then there's also the big guard tower.
Up front, right, in the administration building. Yeah, so those are both of Just Nice pie in the sky projects. So the guard tower in the center, we can access for maintenance purposes, but no real access beyond that. We've been talking about Senker for a while now, so I would love to bring that online, but there's like code studies to do in addition to some abatement projects and stabilization, so it's a little bit of a ways off. And same thing with the admin building. Like I think we'd have to tackle a lot of it in order to work our way all the way up to the tower. So that one's not as close up in the horizon of like all the money projects, but I mean I would love to for sure.
What is any unique artifact that you didn't expect so far? I guess the archive.
I want to talk about the sewer. So when we were doing the cell block 14 project, we also, it's a 3-story cell block made of concrete on this side of the site, but we also did a stormwater project as part of it, right? So there's a 200-year-old brick sewer that runs under the perimeter of the site. It's the original sewer. It's made of brick. It's from the 1820s. And we have very limited access to the sewer. We've tried many times to camera it and run a little robo-crawler through it, and we keep hitting all of these roadblocks. So when we did this project in cell block 14, we decided, okay, we're going to make our own access to this sewer. And so we decided to build a manhole, and so we dug down, we like had our guesses about where exactly the sewer was located. We did some like soft digging, we located the sewer, and then they like saw cut a hole in the top of the historic sewer and drilled some anchors into it, and amazingly, this piece of the sewer came out in one piece. 200 years old, in amazing condition. So this isn't necessarily, this is adjacent to your question, because we sought out this artifact, but we have it now. And it's still just in this crate on casters, so we can wheel around our sewer artifact and put it on display. But it helped us understand the sewer a lot better and gave us access to the sewer so that we can, it's still functioning, right? We want to rely on it in the future. And so we're able to excavate that as part of the project and study it. It's
artifact, but in the course of getting tasks from Liz and Jess whenever they do the annual walkthrough, I get to tread a lot of the site, including the hallway up in the tower, down in the basement underneath you here. So there's a whole sprawl of tunnels underneath you as well. So sometimes you go down there and like I saw like an old tube sock that's gotten down there, you know, some random things. But I believe I also did see somebody carved in a date into some of the masonry there. So sometimes we'll find some stuff like that, and I'm just gonna take a picture and send it to Liz. So, yeah, it's interesting, and we'll add that little footnote to that area of in the whole annals of the history of the site.
I have seen a lot of dates and scribbles and some interesting drawings of women in random places. But speaking of the tunnels, down in one of the tunnels down here, I did see a really beautiful, ornate Victorian porcelain toilet that I don't know where it came from, but it's gorgeous. I was like, I can get these out of here, but no.
Any other questions from the audience?
What were the original roofs and how, what you guys do for the coverings for keeping water out now as part of the preservation efforts?
So the original roofs vary by block, so depending on the date and also how many times it's been altered or changed. A lot of these cell blocks have been extended or they've been added on to, and of course just the exercise yards have been covered. So it really varies. So we have some precedents for slate, we have precedents for stainless steel metal, we have asphalt shingle on a lot of blocks at various points throughout the history. So whenever we take on a roofing project, we kind of go through and look through the documentation of what was here, what we think was here at different periods of time. We actually were just talking about cell block 1 and what that had looked like, and we have slate early on, and then when the block was extended, it was still slate, and then when there was a school building that was built onto one side of cell block 1 over the exercise yards, and that was a 2-story building. Then at some point it got changed to stainless steel metal. So we've been talking about, okay, if we actually really do the roof there, what would we go back with? And I think I'm with Liz on the campus. We could probably go back with stainless steel metal. Well, that, yeah. But it's also because of the changes that have been made to the block and kind of making sure that it all fits together and it makes sense. Putting slate back doesn't necessarily feel right because all the changes have been made to the exercise yards and how it exists now. So we have to kind of like think through how it's been changed over time, when those changes were made, and how it exists today in its current construction. And then for temporary coverings, it was called Tough Wrap, and now it's called Durascrim or something. So it's like a plastic membrane. The Tough Wrap was a heat shrink product. This is now just basically a really heavy plastic barrier that gets put on and then it gets seamed together. It's not pretty. It hopefully buys us 5, 10, 15 years. It's one of those things like we try and maintain it because it's the most cost-effective things to do right now. Because doing cell blocks 5 and 6, which have this Durascrim on it now, it's every block it's at least $1 million to do a new roof because of all the framing that needs to be done, plus the masonry stabilization work that needs to be done. It's a lot.
I just wanted to emphasize one of the things that you said, not specifically about roofing, but our preservation philosophy here is that we're preserving the site as a stabilized ruin, which means that we're kind of keeping it the way we found it, liberally, right? It is important that we restore roofs and keep water out of the building, but one of the really cool things about this site is that you do get to see the layers, right? Things fall down and now you can see how it was built and what was there before. You can see how the site evolved over time. And so it gets really complicated when you start restoring a piece of the site to a moment in time because the piece next to it is from a different time. And so when we're talking about like the roof on cell block 1, it was like originally shingled and then back on it, but the building next to it like didn't exist at the same time or like looked different at that moment in time. It just gets messy. So in general, our rule of thumb is like we try to restore something to the material that it would have been in 1971 when the prison closed. If we do have to put a new material on in order to keep water out and protect the structure in the long term. We have exceptions to that based on the importance of the space or activity. Like I don't know if anyone has been in the synagogue or the Catholic chaplain's office. Those are examples of areas that we took a heavier hand to due to the significance of the space.
Hi. As I'm just sitting here, I feel like people are walking behind me and the whole thing is shaking. Is something below us?
Yeah, actually, what's below you is this beautiful structure. It's this beautiful masonry vault, a cross vault that comes across, and it's absolutely stunning. And then to support that, there's a lot of steel jacks in place as well. But this center hub is basically the center for where all the heating and plumbing and everything else that ran through all the cell blocks. So underneath each cell block is a tunnel that's running all the systems that went into each one of the cells.
All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It was a real pleasure to get to talk with Liz, Sara, and Jess. I really thank them for taking time out of today to come chat with us. And thank you guys so much for coming and visiting. I recommend also, if you get an opportunity, checking out some of our Unlocking History tours, which includes the hospital block, which they did talk about today. Additionally, you can also explore the synagogue and some other spaces that have been restored on your own as well. And we really appreciate you being here. Tomorrow, there's going to be a panel about the collections at Eastern State.